She's done. She's gone. Come on.
Get your shoes on the check. She got to open the wall.
There she is.
Okay, everybody, we are setting up right now. The meeting is already being recorded. I just need to set up the live stream.
Yeah, we're done.
Okay, it looks like the Facebook live stream isn't working for some reason, but the meeting is being recorded anyways. Just mute myself and stay on here until 11 o'clock. Okay, we will begin in just a minute. I'm just holding on a bit so others can join. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. We have, this is, I believe, the webinar Zoom meeting number 6, and it seems like a long time ago, but we only really started doing these last week. So it's quite incredible the amount of movement that has happened as far as these open source and low-cost ventilators are concerned. So I'll go ahead and quickly go through the next slides because I know most of you have already been on several of these. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this. So about Sop Technologies, my company, very similar to many of you that are on the call right now, is not really focused on medical devices. Instead, we saw that there was an extreme need due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and we decided to get involved. We just created a website so that we can help groups that are working on these devices to collaborate with each other. And really our goal is to help accelerate the process and the speed with which these different devices are available for people in need, because obviously the demand was not being met. So the website, as many of you already know, has lots of useful information, and there are 3 main collaboration methods that we're using: the webinars, a Slack workspace, and then also we have the email newsletter. And you can sign up for those via our website. One interesting thing that we just changed on the first page called Ventilators Projects List is that we embedded the spreadsheet from Robert Reed. He presented actually a couple of webinars ago. He has this group. He's part of a group called Public Invention, and they have this spreadsheet that's titled Evaluation of Open Source Ventilators. It's a massive, massive spreadsheet. And it's not only a listing of the different projects that are out there, but they also assess various criteria, and they have a methodology by which they do that. And you can see all of that. So if you go to our homepage here, soptechint.com/ventilators, you actually will see the embedded spreadsheet there. You can link to it directly if you want. And at this point, there are probably around 80 projects that are on there. And this is updated quite regularly and automatically. So if you want that information, it's there. The government contacts page is also available. Let me go here. I'm quickly going through these since most of you have already seen this. The suppliers, vendors, and manufacturers page, similar to the contacts page in the ventilator projects, you can just click that button there, fill out a form, and it will automatically populate the spreadsheet below. I believe there are 30 vendors and suppliers and manufacturers that have already entered their own information in here to say that they are available to help with these projects, either to manufacture parts or to work on engineering efforts. So if you're working on a project and you don't know who to talk to, that's a short list of people that have already said that they have capacity and expertise and availability to do this. We also have a form that people can fill out to request ventilators. And there's a newsletter link, so you can sign up for that and also support these efforts. So here's some recent updates. I know I mentioned last time or a few webinars ago about the Medtronic ventilators, how they were going to share their files open source. Well, now they did this to a significant degree. And in fact, we'll have a presentation today by someone that has been working with these files in order to be able to build these ventilators. This is a big deal because these are ventilators that have already received FDA approval. They have been used for quite some time on patients. And we're not starting from scratch trying to build these. and they have a lot of technical documentation. So once you visit our website, you can go there and see the link and just download all of the files straight from the Medtronic website. We also have more manufacturers on there, and some folks included government contacts for Spain and Italy on our website. And I also found a couple of other sites that people can go to as resources if they do need to identify where is the demand for ventilators, and also how to connect with hospitals and others. This is incredibly important. We can not only think about the design and building of these different devices, but we need to make sure that they can get to people as quickly as possible. So with that said, let's have a brief moment of silence to honor those that have lost to this battle of COVID-19. Thank you. I'll go to the next slide now. Okay, so before we get to the presentations, we actually have two presentations today. We have one from Alex Bobotek. He will be talking about his project. We also have one from Seth Hilbrand. He'll be talking more specifically about the project that he's working on for that Medtronic ventilator that is currently open source. I say currently because that is a big caveat on that one. But starting off with the introductions, Andre Dimino, would you like to unmute yourself and provide a quick intro?
Thanks, Emilio. Hi, my name is Andre Dimino. I'm CEO of ADM-tronics. We're a 51-year-old medical device design manufacturing company. We produce a number of therapeutic products unrelated to the ventilator field. Just very interested in what you're doing here on this collaboration, and been exposed to a number of other groups that are doing different things related to COVID. So I'm here to listen and to learn and to see what everybody's doing. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Andre. Much appreciated. Cash Sigler, would you like to provide an intro? Please feel free to unmute yourself.
Yeah, so I'm with Seastrom Manufacturing. We are an approximately 100-year-old company. We grew up in the aerospace and defense industry, but then broadened our offerings in about the 50s or 60s to all industries. We've been working with the medical device industry for years. And recently, especially with this crisis that's going on, we've produced millions of parts over the last couple of weeks for some of the projects that are currently going on to ramp up with the ventilator manufacturing for some of the initiatives that are currently going on. So we stand by as a resource, and if anybody would like to reach out to us, we are listed in the vendor profile section of the website.
Thank you. Thank you. Don Campo, would you like to provide a quick intro? Please feel free to unmute yourself.
Good morning, all, and welcome. I'm Don Campo. I'm a mechanical and aerospace engineer that's been about 40 years of my career working in the oil and gas industry in the Houston, Texas area. I'm currently retired. I am collaborating with Rob Kirby and others. We initially did a basic design for emergency ventilators based on the AMBO bag, very similar to what many others have done. We then thought that given the saturation there and the fact that there were others that had progressed a little more rapidly than us, we thought we would work more on the supply chain and links to industry with the people that we know that actually can do prototype manufacturing and help with testing and help with manufacturing. And then we shifted gears again under Rob's great leadership back into really considering designs primarily targeted outside for distribution outside the US, because we thought that's where the greatest need was. And we talked about basically cherry picking the contributions of others and building and testing 3 prototypes. And then we became aware of the fact that Medtronics has open sourced this PB 560, which is about a 10-year-old design of a commercial ventilator that they marketed. And I guess there's a fairly convoluted story about why that happened and how that happened, but we won't go into that now. Anyway, I'm interested in mechanical design, and I've been successful with some inventions and got a few patents and so forth. So I'm just trying to help on that side.
Great, thank you, Don. And I think what you said about the shift that you started working on because you were realizing all the activity that was already going on that's part of the reason why we're doing these webinars, because there's an extreme amount of activity right now going on to try and design and develop and manufacture these ventilators. And we want to avoid duplication of work as much as possible. I even mentioned during the intro that I added the spreadsheet that Robert Reed had created. I embedded it onto our website because I realized that I was, creating some redundancy with a spreadsheet that we had of our own, and it was very incomplete. So these are things that I think a lot of us are grappling with, and we want to avoid having a lot of smart and very capable people and companies building things that somebody else is already working on, and there being a void in another important area. Thank you for that. For the intros here, Jim Pearson, would you like to provide a brief intro?
Morning, everybody. My name is Jim Pearson. I'm a small manufacturing company here in Southeast Michigan called Rocket Manufacturing. We do CNC machining and mostly assembly, fixture building. And basically, I'm just here standing by in case anybody needs something built. That's what we're here for.
Great. Thank you, Jim. Matt Drummer, would you like to provide a quick intro? Please feel free to unmute yourself.
How you doing? My name's Matt Drummer. I work for ADM Tronics Unlimited. We're a contract manufacturer that manufactures mostly medical devices. And again, we just started looking at this last week, and we're happy to be here.
Thank you, Matt. Much appreciated. Let's see who else we have here. Rob Kirby.
Yep, I'll be brief. Don's already pretty much covered everything. So I guess just to summarize, he sort of laid out the background. We're from the oil and gas industry on the higher tech side, downhole electronics, small mechanical devices, and then larger devices for drilling in harsh environment. Basically, I guess I'll phrase the way Don put it a little differently. I mean, we got involved because we saw that there was a need, and we thought that we could maybe help because right now we're all kind of sitting around. But I think as we went along, what I think we decided as our main driving objective was this has happened in the past, and it's left behind always a bunch of projects that got just to kind of the mechanical part. And that's not a system, that's just an element. And that's not a criticism, that's just historically an observation. So our mission this time was we wanted to move the ball further down the field. If we were unsuccessful in delivering a ventilator for this crisis, next time we wanted to have left off at the spot where we had one almost ready to deploy that we could pick up from that point and move forward. So I was really excited when the Medtronics thing came up because that serves that purpose. I mean, we won't have to go back to square one in the future because of that. I mean, we're all going to move to that level, whether you use that design or keep working on your own. At least there's a high water mark now on the wall for everybody to shoot at.
Thank you. Thank you. Robert Reed, would you like to provide a brief intro? Please feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, yeah, I maintain the spreadsheet that Emilio talked about there, looking at all of the ventilators that I can get information about. I'm also attempting to build a monitor system, not a ventilator itself, but that which tells you if the ventilator is producing the pressure and volumes and respiration rate and inhalation to exhalation ratios that are appropriate. I don't know if any other ventilator would be able to co-opt my open source monitor and include it in their design, or if it'll simply be plugged into the airway there. That's the main thing I'm working on right now, as well as trying to keep on top of all of this. And I'm very interested to learn what the situation with the Medtronic is. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Santiago Rodriguez, please feel free to unmute yourself for the brief intro.
Hi, good morning. My name is Santiago Rodriguez. I am from Panama, and I'm trying to build a prototype here in Panama for help our people. I'm civil engineering, and I'm working with my dad in this project. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great to hear. And just so you know, on our website, in the section for ventilators, we have actually the section for webinars. We have videos of the past projects. And as you know already, as Robert Reed mentioned, there's a huge, massive spreadsheet that he has put together with contacts with many groups. So, you don't need to get started from step one. And I think that's a good thing. So anything that you're trying to work on in Panama, hopefully you can already benefit from the folks in Israel, Brazil, and all around the world that are working on different projects to identify one that best meets your needs and capabilities. Sebastian, would you like to provide a quick intro?
Yeah, hi, I'm Sebastian. I'm from Germany. I'm part of the DIY Beatmungsgeräte group. We are about 300 people on the Discord server now. We started out with a hackathon organized by the German government, and now we are continuing the work. We are now part of the Solutions Enabler program that has grown out of this hackathon. And what we're trying is to build a DIY ventilation device. And because we are so many people, we are following 3 technical leads. One is to mechanize the ambu bag. A second one is based on a piston pump design. And a third one is inspired by the Medtronic, where we want to see if we can use a turbine as the center of the device.
Great, thank you for that. Steve Wazak, would you like to provide a brief intro?
Sure. First of all, I want to thank you, Emilio, for putting this together. So I'm here representing two organizations, L&M Instruments, which does IoT-based environmental monitoring, as well as Green Group Industries, which is a contract manufacturer offering CNC machining, stamping, metal injection molding. And for both these organizations, I think what we'd like to bring to the table is, one, we have some manufacturing and 3D printing capacity, but also we have engineers that have some good DFM expertise. If anybody's looking for collaboration on how to get over a hump or how to best make something get to market the fastest, we'd be happy to help with that. And also, Robert, you had talked about putting a sensor in these. If there's anybody that is looking at putting a sensor in a ventilator that would like some cloud connectivity, we can help with that too.
Great, thank you, Steve. Much appreciated. So I'll go ahead and move to the next slide here because we have a couple of presentations. So let's start off with Seth's presentation, and then we'll go ahead with Alex. I purposely not initiated their intros yet because I know that they will be speaking quite a lot about their projects. So Seth, would you like to take it from here, maybe share your screen so that we can see the slides that you have prepared?
Okay, sure, let's see if I get that. So my name is Seth Ober, and I am,
let's see, I'll stop sharing my screen. Maybe that will help.
Okay, there we go. Let's see here. There, and all right. Okay, so you're gonna see the general thing. All right, well, now we're on there. Okay, so we are an open ventilator project. We formed after the PB560 release. We are a group of approximately 70 or so individuals, mostly engineers and designers, firmware programmers, with an odd smattering of lawyers and electronics manufacturers. We're focusing on updating this PB560 design. Medtronic has partnered with a number of contract manufacturers around the US to build the design as is. And in our conversations with Medtronic, this is stressing their supply chain at the moment. And so we are updating this based off this design. We are changing the supply chain to reduce our dependency on the same lines of manufacture that are currently being clogged. As someone had mentioned earlier, this design is about 12 years old, and so a number of the electronics are end of life. They are no longer available for current manufacture, and the stocks are being utilized almost exclusively now for these older machines. And so we have come together to update and modernize this using currently available electronic components, as well as adjusting some of the more critical internal components. So our goals are modernizing the electronics and updating the firmware to support this as we change some of the smaller aspects, the memory chips, for instance, in order to find currently available parts. We do need to make minor modifications to the firmware systems on the 4 embedded microprocessor units that are in the inside this one unit. So far, and we've finished about 80% of the printed circuit boards. The electronic BOM has been revised to currently available components, and we've begun establishing our distribution channels through companies like Viamed that provide ventilators directly to hospitals from manufacturers. Our ongoing work at the moment, we're focused at the moment on the mechanical bill of materials revision. This is updating to replace some of the custom screws, for instance, that are not critical in the item, but do need to be either procured from the single manufacturer that they're spec'd for, or replaced with more commonly available fasteners in order to hold the unit together. We have a primary microprocessor decision that we are working through right now. The primary microprocessor is no longer manufactured. It is end of life, and there are limited stocks available within the United States. There are larger stocks available within Europe, but there are limitations on exporting those stocks throughout the world. And so we are evaluating right now with ST Microelectronics as well as Atmel whether we can shift the existing code base to a different microprocessor, and this would be a modification that we're testing out at the moment. We're also proceeding with FDA emergency use authorization paperwork for our updated design, and we're establishing manufacturing contacts. The major remaining challenges in our project to update the PB560 are actually 4. I've listed 3 here. The turbine that you see on the right, the blue and gray element, is the major outstanding component that we do need to find. This is produced by Airfan in France. They are currently massively behind stock, and they are not providing these to any customers who are not already established prior to the COVID-19 crisis. And so we are actively looking for replacement turbines. We've identified a number of motors that would work for this, but we do not have at the moment a manufacturing procedure that would allow us to generate the housing or the turbine blades that would couple with the motor and sensors in order to provide the airflow we need. So we're actively looking for options on that. If anyone on this call has some ideas on that, please do feel free to contact me. Also, the LCD and housing replacement, these screens are no longer available, and resolutions have increased in the meantime, and so we're adjusting this down to a smaller housing with a smaller LCD, and identifying stocks around the world right now is an ongoing challenge for us. Then the battery pack, this is meant for offline operation in the case of AC power failure. the battery pack remains an outstanding issue that does need to be solved. The FDA has reduced the requirements for battery operated timelines. We no longer need to meet the 60-minute battery operation timeline for the emergency use authorization. We would be able to modify this down and utilize some more commercially available batteries. However, we do not have any battery designers on our team yet, and so we're actively looking for folks with that type of experience in order to help us update the battery pack. And the last element that I did neglect to list on this presentation is the O2 mixing regulation chamber. And so the valves for oxygen control and the mixing are not currently available from the Medtronic stock. So we're looking for options to replace that at the moment. So those are the four remaining major challenges, kind of our long tent poles at the moment.
Seth, thank you for that. By the way, if you can open up the chat, there were some questions that folks have been adding there.
Yeah.
The first one is from Robert Reed.
Okay.
He wrote Q1 on it.
Okay, let's see here. Let's see, Steve, send me, oh, no, questions. Okay, here we go. Design will likely be considered a derivative work and therefore not usable when the WHO declares the pandemic over or in 2024 if the Medtronic enforces licensing. Is that correct? Yes, we are licensing this under the emergency use authorization decree from the FDA. That means that it will only be usable under this pandemic declaration within the United States. This, of course, differs in country to country, but within the United States, these ventilators will not be considered long-term assets that would be acquired. That said, the design and the work to produce these lines, we are discussing with our contacts at Medtronic right now about the possibility of developing this particular derivative design as an open hardware license that would not have the same time limit that they're imposing on their original design. That is not concrete, but they do recognize the value in contributions to their IP in releasing their specifications. And so there exists a small, I will caveat that, small but non-zero possibility that we will be able to continue this past the 2024. So yes, we do fall under both that licensing and the FDA regulation limitations.
Thank you for that. I see there's some more questions here on the chat. There's a Q2 from Robert.
Let's see, Q2. I've written the PB560 manual. It cannot be used with FiO2 greater than 50% limitation for the clinical use in odd circumstances. Is this really true? That is a question that I am not qualified to answer. So I'm going to have to defer that to someone with more experience in the clinical applications of these. There is an EBP PAPS turbine Q3. Does it have a flow sensor built in? It does. It has two flow sensors, an inhalation, exhalation flow sensor, as well as 3 pressure sensors built into it. And okay, and let's see, and the last question I see from Andre Domino, won't the design have to secure 6061 and other certifications prior to use? No, that is part of the emergency use declaration that preempts the requirements within the United States. Again, I believe we did see that there was a similar declaration applicable within Spain. I have not seen the declarations yet for other countries, but we are looking for countries that do have these modifications to their traditional certification pipelines. What we do need to proceed through is, so we've been applying for the emergency use authorization as an affiliated group. We are not a manufacturer of these devices, and so once we partner with the actual manufacturer who wants to assemble and produce these devices, that manufacturing group with all of its sourcing chains will need to present that device and the documentation for the chains to the FDA in order to receive authorization under the emergency use. And there remains a possibility that we will go too far afield in what we are presenting as a possibility and not be allowed to utilize a particular part if they deem it too dangerous for the application. So emergency use authorization is not a blanket. It is a case-by-case authorization, but they are very, very receptive to questions, and they are working quite hard to get more ventilators approved for use during this pandemic.
I have a quick question, Seth, before you get to question 4 that's listed there. Do you already have some companies in mind that can assemble and ultimately provide this paperwork to the FDA for clearance and approval, or are you still looking for more companies to do that?
Thank you. We are looking for more companies to do that. Right now, we are in discussions with a smaller assembler in upstate New York. They have capacity. They figure to do about 200 a week if they're pushing. Obviously, 200 a week is not going to fill the need, and no one that I have spoken with yet sees a limit to the total number of ventilators that are going to be needed over the course of this crisis. And they're looking not just toward this sort of April, May, June timeline, but also the potential resurgence in the fall and further on until we have a long-term solution to this. And so we don't have an identified cap of how much demand there is for these ventilators worldwide at the moment. And so any manufacturers that we are able to interact that are able to help us with producing this, we are happy to provide electronic support and programming experience. We can design test jigs and get through the Medtronic certification. In case you haven't looked at the documents yet, the Medtronic file release pack not only includes the plans, but there are also full manufacturing testing procedures that are contained within that, and so we can verify to Medtronic specifications the functionality of the end devices.
Great to hear that. So there's a Q4 here in the chat from Robert Reed. How much will this likely cost? And he's asking for those in developing nations.
Right. That is going to be driven. The cost drivers on this are twofold. Number one is going to be the battery. The battery is going to be a substantial cost driver. If we have a reduced off AC functionality requirement, we can reduce that cost. We can reduce that battery cost substantially. If we and after that, the secondary cost driver are going to be the valves, as those are a precision manufactured device. Everything else within the device is injection molding and circuitry. The circuit boards and components, total cost of the circuit boards and components is less than $100 per unit.
Okay, so if you were to try and estimate the total cost of the unit, what would be the range? I know that you cannot give a precise figure, but what would be the range more or less?
I think we would be looking at $500 to $1,000 for the production cost of the unit. And if you wanted to go up to the full 60 minutes, then you'd probably be looking more in the range of 1,500.
Got it. So when you say that, you mean the full 60 minutes on battery? Is that what you're saying?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Wow, that's substantially lower in terms of cost compared to what I've seen, at least in the news, for some other devices that are out there. But I don't want to take up too much time on that. Sorry. Go ahead.
Sure. No, that's absolutely correct. That is at production cost. We're not, this factors in zero overhead that may be involved with the additional costs of testing, the additional costs of moving individual components from manufacturer to manufacturer, and so you should use your extrapolation to come up with what your work cost for assembling and producing this ventilator would be based on your own production.
Good to know. Good to know. So here's a question that Andre asked on the chat. Does emergency declaration provide an indemnification for any liabilities from the use of these devices?
Yeah, excellent question. It does. The emergency use authorization itself does not provide this, but there is a secondary declaration from the Department of Health that has provided within the United States. We do have indemnification for all ventilator manufacturers, and I can send you a link to these documents so that you can include them on your website after the webinar.
Thank you. Thank you. That would be great. Let's see here. I know that several people have been chiming in. They didn't have questions, but they had some recommendations. I know Sebastian mentioned items related to a turbine that's used in the automobile industry. But just so you know that these things are in the chat, and later on you can review that. Rob Kirby is saying here, their vendors have rechargeable battery products as well as lithium cells. So this is great. It seems like people are providing several resources here on the chat. Rob Kirby, man hours per unit to assemble and test. What are we looking at in terms of the time requirement for the assembly and the testing?
If we remove so there is a burn-in requirement in their nominal testing procedure. So there's a 36-hour burn-in requirement there. Absent that, the test procedure is about 5 hours with all tests passing. Obviously longer with any tests that do not pass. Assembly time, I would hazard a guess, not being directly affiliated with an assembly house myself. This would I could easily be off by an order of magnitude here, but we're not looking at 100 hours. We're not looking at 100 hours to assemble this. These are relatively serviceable units, and the number of internal components are relatively low. So I would hazard a guess that we're looking at somewhere between 15 and 15 and 25 hours for assembly procedures.
Okay. A question that I have regarding these different electronic components that your team is working on, is that also open source? Are you making all of that available publicly?
Yes. So all of our work on the circuit boards, the bill of materials, and the components, as well as any modifications we're making to the SolidWorks assembly files, we are posting these all publicly on our repository. So that's we're available at the link below, the openventilator.gitlab.io. Now, if anyone goes to that at the moment, you'll note that it is just a placeholder. However, the GitLab site associated with that is extremely active, and later today, our web designer is going to be updating that with some links, so it will become more useful for listing the information that we have available later on today. If anyone wants to take the files that we are generating and utilize those for their own production, that would be fantastic. That's exactly why we're posting them, and we stand by to help you and assist you with any of the electronic support aspects of this that your company might need.
Thank you for that. I know we have another presentation that's coming up right now from Alex. He's also working on a project. So I know there are lots of questions that people want to send your way. If you want to, Seth, add your email to the chat so folks can reach out to you directly. I know I've said this in other webinars, but I don't want Sop Technologies, meaning me, to be a go-between. I don't want to slow down processes or steps. This is why I'm trying to, help connect the different groups. The last thing we need is more bottlenecks. So Seth just added his website there, his email address. Please feel free to contact him. Seth, thank you very much for your presentation. Do you have any other final thoughts before we move on to the next presentation?
Just that I am incredibly thankful that you are putting together this group and making these connections. I appreciate the time, and please feel free to reach out to me with questions. And if you do not directly have the answers on any of these remaining challenges that I've listed in the presentation, but if your contacts in the industry might, I would greatly appreciate those contacts made as well. It would be great to get these out to people as soon as we can.
Thank you. And please keep me posted. Also, I would say Robert Reed. I think he added his email address there on the chat. Please keep him posted as well. I know that his spreadsheet has a lot more traction and visibility right now than my website does, and I want to make sure that as many people as possible can see all of this. So I'll go ahead and thank you. I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen now. Thank you, Seth. I'll quickly introduce the next person. Alex.
Before we move forward, I just want to thank Seth and his team. My understanding is that these 4 embedded microprocessors three of them were designed with 3 different design softwares and didn't really integrate, and there was a lot of cleanup and a lot of work to be done there, and those guys have achieved at least 80% of that in the last week or 10 days or so, and that is huge for mechanical engineers like me that aren't microprocessor guys. So I think that's a huge add, and it's really going to move this thing along more rapidly, and I just want to publicly thank him and his team for their work so far.
Thanks for that, Don. And just so everybody knows, Don and Rob Kirby, I've been working together with them a lot. So this is not just me. Just so everybody knows, it's definitely a team effort. to have all of these things up and get the word out about these webinars. So with that said, Alex, would you like to share your screen so that we can get started with your presentation? I'll stop sharing my screen. Alex, can you hear me? Yes, okay, he's starting his screen sharing now. Alex, I'm not able to hear you in case you're speaking. You know, I think you said you were on your phone. I will go ahead and unmute your phone for you. I've unmuted.
Great, thank you for that, Emilio. Let me give a brief introduction. I'm trained as an electrical engineer. In past lives, I did control and instrumentation. For the last 20 years or so, I've been doing communications work, primarily spam fighting, and have some do-it-yourself capabilities and have contributed to a number of open source projects. As an example, can you see my web? I'm sorry. Can you see my webcam? Can I show things with that also? For example, what I'm holding up now. I don't know how I toggle between me and my PowerPoint.
I'm not seeing your webcam right now. Can somebody else see it?
Okay.
I don't think you can do that.
Okay, so you're just seeing my my PowerPoint now. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think if you go to the top bar, you'd see your little window, but it would be very small, depending on how people have their
Okay, well, I'll just use that. So just some examples of this. So I've done a lot of DIY projects and open source. Just as an example, here we have a metering valve for precise flow control, and I've made adaptations to mechanical design changes. Let's see if I can show this. Maybe I'll just turn my web camera to build electronic and mechanical devices that will give closed loop computer control to something like a simple metering valve. You can see the mechanics of it here. This is 3D printed with some microcontrollers around it. So that's who I am and what I'm about. Getting into the presentation now, I've tried to think about what I could do and how I could contribute. I'm not sure that the DIY or community-built model is the right one, but it's certainly one I can contribute to. I found Robert Red's presentation to be extremely insightful, and it provided a framework for perhaps modular contributions. I shouldn't say perhaps, for modular contributions, which I think is very insightful. The one thing I'd like to add to that is there's a need for support also. There's a need for people who can go out and fix these things, make sure that they're working, perhaps answer questions. I see that need. So some of the challenges I see in community-built or DIY ventilators are that they're highly dependent on readily available parts. There may be very limited manufacturing capabilities as opposed to assembly capabilities. You may have to do it with what you have. The product has to be trustworthy, and that's very difficult to do when you have little control over who's building and what they're building with. There needs to be some sort of test certification and support process. And well, I think I already said the diverse parts and factories. We really don't know what we're dealing with here. And I started thinking about what I could do in 1 to 2 days, mostly using what I already have. Now, let me take the web camera and show you a little bit of what I already have. I don't know if you can see these.
Just 1 second there, Alex. So for those of you that don't know how to view Alex's video footage there that he's showing from his webcam, you can go to the bottom of the screen where it says Manage Participants, click on that, and then there should be a little pop-up window. You may need to either use grid view on that or another one of those views, and then scroll down so that you can see where it says Alex Bobotech, and there you should be able to see his video. I had a hard time finding it initially, so see if that works for everyone. Steve, are you able to see that? If you can maybe give a quick thumbs up.
For those who couldn't see it, I was showing pictures of some of the articles in my workshop. Some of the quadcopters, many of which haven't flown in 3 years. This is a tremendous reservoir of parts. These quadcopters have generally brushless motor, well, always in my case, brushless motors and motor controllers with some sort of standards of sizes, motor footprints. They have microcontrollers with motor control and USB interfaces. There's some standardization there. Years ago, the APM and PixHawk became predominant standards. Things have changed a bit since then, but there are hundreds of thousands of these gracing our garages, probably little used. They have integrated pressure sensors, typically used for altitude control, being capable of sensing altitude changes of as little as 10 centimeters. And they're often already in the hands of people that can build things, people with the inclination and talents required to build things. So that got me started on thinking, or I should say, as I started thinking about what materials I had available, this seemed like a great starting point. I should also point out that for power supplies, something like a 400-watt PC power supply, I believe, has adequate power. And there are UPS devices, standard computer UPS devices, which seem, at least at first glance, to meet the power requirements. A PC power supply plugged into a typical household UPS should at least give you 10 to 20 minutes. So mechanically, let me see if I can go full screen now. That should be enough. Mechanically, I've thought about the heart, of course, is a blower, some sort of blower, and I've been favoring, of course, the turbine model with a DC-controlled motor. There have to be some filters on the ins and outs, inputs and outputs. But the core is basically a blower controlled by a microcontroller with a non-return valve, almost certainly, a single pressure sensor, some sort of valve here, which might be, it could be a solenoid valve. I think solenoids may be a bit more difficult to manufacture. They're not in everybody's possession. It could perhaps be some kind of servo valve or perhaps some sort of shuttle valve with the baseline pressure during expiry set by a secondary blower, likely, or else servo controlled by a secondary blower, perhaps. So working on or starting with an architecture like this, some of the key design, it quickly became apparent to me that the software can be written. There is no shortage of capable developers. Certainly there are ultra high reliability requirements, but it's clear to me that any of these microcontrollers that are out there today, just about any of them could do the job, and people can write software. There are old laptops or whatever that can be used to provide control panels, displays, graphs, whatever. That's not, in my view, a high risk item. That can be done. The key challenges seem to be, to me at least, as an electrical engineer without a lot of fluid mechanics or blower design experience, the key challenge seems to be the blower design, followed by that, the valve design, and that's where I have put my head to work. And I started with, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself there. Started looking at some of the requirements. First, the inputs are somewhat unpredictable. In some cases, there may be air or oxygen from an oxygen concentrator, a tank, perhaps a hospital. It's not clear exactly what that will be. And based on what I've read, and I found the UK MHRA specifications to be extraordinarily helpful here. Really glad they put that out. But it looks like the peak peak airflow or gas flow that is required is just over 1 liter per second, with a tidal volume of up to 800 milliliters, maybe a liter, with an adult respiratory rate of somewhere between 10 and 20 per minute, giving us a design point of having to support a 3-second period at about 1.1 liters per second. And given that we tend to exhale for longer than we inhale, this means about 3/4 of a second to push out that or push into the patient 800 milliliters. That's where the 1.1 liter per second came from. Pressure has to be with some losses in the system. Capability has to be at least 70 centimeters H2O, which is almost exactly 1 psi, with linear pressure ramping for a pressure control design. And so the motor calculations I did were based on the ideal energy that it takes to put into compressing this air to 1 psi, which is about 32 watts. Conservatively, a brushless motor can be about 80% efficient. I don't know much about blower mechanical efficiency, but it seems to me that 50% is a reasonable target. And there are plenty of blower designs that achieve that efficiency. 3D printing probably decreases it. There's more friction, turbulence, whatever. But it looks to me like we're talking about a motor that at the peak, at the highest pressure during the end of the inhalation cycle, 80 watts is about the minimum. And that's certainly consistent with what you can get out of a quadcopter. The particular motor that I've chosen to experiment with is capable of about 200 watts peak. And a bit about environment here. Hydrocarbon lubricants are definitely a bad thing in a pure oxygen environment. And I believe motors would have to be cleaned, probably in a solvent soak, and then bearings re-oiled with a fluorinated polymer lubricant, which is readily available in welding supply and other types of, and some other industrial supply houses. So there would certainly have to be a relubrication. And let me talk a bit about what I've done to date. What you see here in the first picture, the one towards the center, is a Pixhawk, nominally a Pixhawk flight controller. It has a 32-bit microprocessor on it. It also has an auxiliary, I believe, 16-bit one. And what you see here is a 3D printed manifold in the red circled area, a 3D printed manifold, 2 pieces glued over the top of the pressure sensor with a tube attachment. And I've done some tests with this and used it. I have some data of it sensing my tidal breathing through a mask.
Hey, Alex, just so you know, we have about 3 minutes left, just so that we can allow some folks to also have their Q&A, but please feel free to continue.
Okay. So I have a pressure sensor. I've made some modifications to the open source motor controllers to provide an RPM output. It requires soldering an extra wire or an extra wire or two to a very common open source controller. It's easy to make this modification to up to several hundred different models that would cover 90-some% of the motor controllers that were out there a few years ago. And I've set up blower test instrumentation, which allows me to evaluate the flow and pressure capabilities and curves of this 3D printed blower, which is one I put together. So I've been working on trying to come up with a 3D printed blower design that meets these basic requirements. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to find one after searching the web many times. I haven't been able to find a suitable 3D printed brushless DC powered motor design. I'm sorry, blower design, and would love to find that or perhaps help with that. This is not my specialty. Filters can easily be built with 3D printers and vacuum cleaner bags. I've actually done some of those for masks. Yeah, some of the N100 masks that I have, or P100 masks that I have. So this is where I am. I would love to collaborate with others. I certainly don't think on my own, I'm going to come up with a complete ventilator design, but would love to contribute to some module, contribute designs, or or perhaps just build and integrate. That's all I have in the in my presentation. I'm happy to take questions.
Great. If anybody has a question, please feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, this is Rob Reed. I do have a question. This is very interesting work, and it seems to me it's related to the work that Seth was doing in the sense that, in a way, swapping out the drive unit of a ventilator, if you have sufficient control and sufficient pressure and flow sensing, should be pretty reasonable no matter what how the specs on the actual source of pressurized air change. For example, it seems to me the Puritan Bennett thing doesn't even need a turbine, in the sense that if you simply had a tank of compressed air and the kind of valve control that it seems to present, you could do that. So it seems to me that we could take what Seth has already done, which is to make an open source design slightly modular so that he could change the display, change the case, change some of the, well, obviously the KiCad circuitry of the thing. Why don't we just go further and essentially build a completely modular open source ventilator design, where you would have very broad resilience to supply chain disruption, because all of the modules would in some sense be replaceable with other parts.
Does anybody want to chime into that?
That makes a lot of sense. The initial thought that I would have on that is that individual parts or individual alterations such as that would make sense as a fork off of the main PB560 design. So if you'd like to take the repository design as we have it and fork off that, modify the SolidWorks connection that you would have, as well as the bill of materials, you should be able to do that and present it as a parallel project, and we'd certainly be up for making space in the repository group for that kind of effort.
Is SolidWorks open source? I mean, well, I know it's not open source. Have they made any kind of free? Is there any kind of free license available for that?
SolidWorks is available at a reduced license, so $20 a year for if you are a maker group or a veteran, or there are a couple other classes that they offer that for. They have offered our group a set of complimentary licenses for our work, specifically on the PB560 that we are making use of.
Do you know of a way to approach them to get to get licensing for people that are contributing to this effort?
I'm going to add to the chat a contact for the SolidWorks for Entrepreneurs program, and hopefully you can reach out to her and see. I think she's a manager for that group, for that team in SolidWorks.
Great. This was, by the way, this blower was designed using OpenSCAD, and there were some imports of other people's STL files, and a lot of tuning and cut and paste and virtual welding based on that. Yeah, well, I certainly think there's a lot of merit to the modular. There are certification challenges, certainly when parts are sourced from in a modular fashion, especially with diverse manufacturing. But we have supply chain challenges. where are you going to get these blower modules?
Yeah. Sebastian, I think you had a question or a comment. I see that you have unmuted.
Yeah, I'd just like to make a comment with regard to the turbine thing. My experience with turbines is typically at much higher flow rates and differential pressures, and they tend to be quite expensive. And the low cost ones, inflators, for instance, don't seem to have the duty cycle or the robustness necessary for the application in a ventilator. So initially I looked more at
You're cutting in and out, Don.
displacement type devices. Sorry. And so with that in mind, I initially looked at more positive displacement devices like the automated ambo bag, or maybe even a piston device or a bellows that might be lower cost and potentially more robust than a turbine. And it's all a function of how long we think these things need to last and so forth. But I haven't found a low cost, robust turbine yet.
Okay.
Well, I don't know what the I think with underrated electronics, for example, running a 20 amp hobbyist grade controller intermittently at 6 amps, probably ramping from somewhere around 100 milliamps to 6 amps, should result in fairly good electrical reliability, even over weeks. It's so underrated. Bearing failure. I mean, what are the moving parts in this? There's a piece of plastic that spins around and a ball bearing motor, which would have its lubricant replaced with actually a better lubricant. That is one that's more stable at higher temperatures. I think bearing failure could be a problem. With these. Most of these are made with not the highest quality bearings. And redundancy is an option here also. I actually thought quite a bit about redundant blower design, but reliability is I wouldn't want to build ventilators for normal use using cheap as you can build them parts from China, which is exactly what quadcopter motors are. But in the situation we're in, bearing failure is a problem.
Thank you for that, Alex. By the way, Sebastian had a question here. Do we have a link to the turbine? Is there a link that you can add on the chat here for open source files?
I can. I'd happy to do that. I don't have a suitable turbine design now. I'm working on one. The one that you saw does not meet the requirements. It doesn't build up. There's too much of a gap between I believe too much of a gap between the turbine and the housing to generate the necessary pressures. So if and when I get to a point where I think I have something that provides a good baseline for others, I would be happy to post that.
Okay.
And I would I'd be most happy if somebody can find, or I'd love to find a blower design that basically works, or at least the CAD drawings for it that I could start printing out and adapt it to some of the common brushless motors.
Great. And by the way, can you add then maybe a link to your website or what files are available in the chat there, so people can see what you do have available if and when you post more things online. And by the way, Seth, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but can you chime in on what happens if people are creating designs that require the use of software, for example, from Medtronic, and then all of a sudden this COVID-19 permission from that Medtronic has given expires, and then all of these other products are out there or devices that kind of relied on that, and there's some kind of modification from Medtronic. Can you give us some insights into that and your conversations with them?
So if I understand your question, what happens to the end user if when the Medtronic license expires? Is that your question?
Actually, both the end user and people that are creating devices that may rely on a certain part of the Medtronic,
Right.
you know, device.
Okay. For the end user, there is no change. The end user depends only on the authorization from the regulatory body to utilize the device. Medtronic's license would prevent additional manufacture or sale of the Medtronic derived parts after their current license expires if they do not modify it.
Okay. So that's something for people to think about, right? Because I think there was a lot of hope, or there is a lot of hope right now, because Medtronic has made all of this open source. But if all of a sudden, if and when this permission expires, then it's possible that a lot of people are left without the ability to make these devices. And there can be a lot of engineering work that goes into improving the Medtronic's device or creating supply chains and other capabilities that possibly won't be utilized afterwards. And that can create a problem. So I think that's important for people to keep in mind as you get involved with the Medtronic's devices. Seth, would you like to give some additional thoughts on that?
Yes, that's absolutely true. I would caution anybody that if you're looking at producing these in order to develop a business model around them, you should not be using the Medtronic design at the moment. If you're looking to produce these devices as a humanitarian action that you're hoping to help end this crisis in better shape and perhaps sooner, then this is a fantastic opportunity for us to do this. But at the moment, 2024 is the hard cutoff of the current licensing terms, or if the WHO declares an end to the pandemic before that, that will also trigger the expiration of the current Medtronic license. So there is a substantial gamble in there if you're building out your supply chains for long-term manufacture. That said, Medtronic put this together very, very quickly, and it is clear from both the way that they were released as well as the contents of their files that they were working day and night to get this out as quickly as they could to the community. And so the license, I believe the license reflects that at the moment. In other words, this is what they could agree to in the very short term to get these files out to people. And as they see as they're watching our efforts, and they are working with us and other groups who are looking at these files, they are updating how they're approaching this as well. And so you should expect to see some changes, but I would not. But at the moment, that is a hard cutoff in 2024.
Okay, is there any general sense as far as when the WHO might stop this, I guess this emergency order, so to speak?
How much is covered by the license anyway? Because you told us you had to take a new PCB, and you had to take a new LCD screen, and we may have to take a different turbine. So
the design is covered by the license, and so what we're now. I'm not a lawyer, and I can't speak to whether or not the legalese in their contract is at all enforceable. But as they have written it, all of the design files are what they are covering under their license, and so the connections on the individual boards are covered by the license. So anything that we're building based on that original design becomes a derivative work, just in the same as software development. Even if you've changed every line in the file, it is still a derivative work if your starting point was covered by a specific license.
Do they have patents on stuff? Do we know that?
Yes, they do have a number of patents on different aspects. We haven't looked in detail as to when any of those patents would expire, but the license aspect would supersedes any of that patent protection, as the license does not have an expiration timeline, or in other words, it doesn't revert to public property after a specific timeline the way the patent would.
Okay, so
I think undoubtedly, no matter what we do, there's going to be a patent nightmare. Yeah, doesn't matter whether you come up with your own design, build somebody else's, or whatever. But it seems to me that the lack of open source here is for many people an issue. I would rather work on well, if we need it now and it's here, great. But it looks like a lot of modification is needed, and to me, it doesn't seem to be obvious that one would want to start with a design that has these constraints around it, these legal constraints around it.
Yeah, and I think it's a balance, right? There's pros and cons, right, to everything. If you're able to quickly modify and produce and deliver the Medtronic design while this availability is still out there, then maybe you can save some lives in the short run or in the short term. But if and when this license expires, this permissive use license, then it would be better to have something else. So maybe there are multiple approaches and parallel paths that can be taken with different devices, so that once this pandemic license is expired, then there still is availability of lower cost ventilators, especially for countries that cannot afford the really expensive ones. So there's no perfect solution to this.
And
Seth?
I would, I agree completely that a fully open source license would be the ideal way to go. And 2024 is still quite a ways off. So we have a good opportunity to make a substantial impact in the short term. People should not underestimate the amount of effort that goes into training, training doctors, nurses, emergency technicians on the correct use of specific ventilators and developing treatment profiles based on those ventilator designs. That is the difference that will be, that is in fact a difference between it actually being a useful ventilator. And that's not to say that the open source designs that are being developed independently right now will not get there, but they are long-term solutions. And so in the immediate term, looking at making a direct impact in the immediate term, we do need to think about the availability of treatment regimes based on the technology that exists out there. And we can definitely use the supply chains and the knowledge base that we build to impact these open source designs at the same time. We definitely have the ability to do that. But I would strongly encourage people not to look past what is needed to implement these designs after they are technically feasible.
Great to hear. Great to hear. Alex, do you have any additional thoughts? We are several minutes over time here. Do you have any last minute thoughts?
Just a response, and I think that's a great point, that the field support, the training, and a question on that. What is the market share of the Medtronic's design? And Is it in 60% of is it 60%? How much training would be required if we were to manufacture these in bulk or massive scale?
It depends from where do you start with training? Do you start with somebody who is already running an intensive care unit? Is he a physician or a specialized nurse, or is it somebody where you have to train very much from the bottom up?
So, what is their market share? How many, if we come up with 500,000 Medtronic 460 clones, how much training would have to be done?
I don't, it's difficult to say. I have a friend who is, who has a friend who is the director of Träger, the German company, and they say they are the market lead and are doing, I think, 60 to 70% of the world market, but I'm not sure how they define it and whatever.
Seth, do you want to chime in on that in terms of demand and market share for these devices from Medtronic?
I don't have any particular numbers on there. There are six major ventilator manufacturers in the world, and each of them is a multi-billion dollar company. It's something that I can certainly dig up to come up with. My point on the training was that the work has been done to develop these trainings, and so a competent doctor who is trained on one ventilator model will be able to take the training manual that exists for the PB560 and employ that directly in their treatment. It's a directly analogous process to the other ventilator models that exist out there. So we can look up and come up with exact numbers, but for our purposes, these ventilator models are in demand and meet all the specifications that are being requested right now by hospitals around the U.S.
Great to hear. Great to hear. So again, if anybody wants to find the links so they can download all of those technical files, and it's on our website. So if you go to this page, I opened up SolidWorks. I downloaded a lot of those files. I opened up the entire assembly, or one of them on SolidWorks, and I even added a few photos there. It's very comprehensive. And of course, it's more than just SolidWorks. There's also code. But please feel free to go to our website. Once you get to that page, you'll see that there's a link directly to the Medtronic page so you can download all these files. Thank you, Alex, for that presentation. Thank you, Seth, for your presentation. The next webinar, TBD. We had several of these already last week. We had three of them this week, Monday, Tuesday, and Friday. I'll upload all these videos on our website. But the next ones are going to be based on the need. Things have been evolving extremely fast. If anybody has been following that spreadsheet from Robert Reed, that's now available on our page as well, you'll see that things are moving forward very quickly here. And it makes sense, and it's a good thing because the need is still great. One thing that I would really like people's support for is to identify the needs and the demands. I just started receiving responses from, for example, the state of Illinois, and they asked me some very basic questions. You know, how much is this device going to cost? How quickly can you produce them? By when can you deliver them? So, and I was just telling them generalities about having the ability to provide devices. So the demand is out there, but we definitely need to have something that can be delivered. And I also need to know, or I want to know, the broader demand, not only in the state of Illinois, but around the world. I sent off a bunch of emails yesterday to different World Health Organization offices for many countries. I'm still waiting to hear back from them. But I think we need to front load this conversation here so we understand what the demand is, so that if and when these devices are ready to be shipped out, we're not starting at that point to find out who needs them. I think we need to know who needs them already, how many they need, what are they willing to pay, and all these other details and logistics as we're still working on finalizing these devices and getting the necessary approvals. So with that said, does anybody have any final thoughts? Don, how about we go with you? I see your microphone's unmuted there.
Yeah, I'd just like to, Medtronics is by an organization that communicates and rates medical equipment manufacturers. Medtronics is listed as having the highest revenue and about the fourth or fifth highest market capitalization. They're a big bear.
Awesome, thank you. Anybody else have any final thoughts before we end the call? Sebastian?
Would you in the future consider switching away from Zoom to another provider of these services that is less privacy intrusive?
Yes, yes, yeah. I use Zoom because it was something I already knew how to use. I also have Google G Suites, so we can potentially use Google Hangouts in the future. But yes, absolutely. Any other last minute thoughts? No? Okay. Thank you, everybody. If you want to, please feel free to add your contact information there in the chat. Again, all of this is being shared publicly. And if you have a website you want to add, please add it in there. Alex, I think some folks wanted to know how they can connect with you. Please feel free to add your information there as well in the chat. And with that said, thank you, everybody. If and when there's a need for another one of these webinars, I'll be glad to host it. But for now, it seems like we have a lot of work to do. We've advanced a lot in the last couple of weeks, and I really appreciate your participation. Thank you.